You are not lazy. You are exhausted in a way no one taught you how to name. Every morning you get up and something in you refuses to move at the same speed it used to. People call it laziness. Your own mind calls it laziness. But Carl Jung would have called it something else entirely. He would have called it the psyche refusing to keep performing. For years, you have been rewarded for showing up as the version of you that other people needed. The reliable one, the agreeable one, the one who never runs out of energy for everyone else's demands. And now that version is breaking down. Not because you are weak. Because it was never sustainable in the first place. You have blamed yourself for it quietly in ways you've never said out loud. You have wondered what's wrong with you, why everyone else seems to manage, why you can't just push through the way you used to. Nothing is wrong with you. Something in you finally stopped agreeing to a deal you never actually chose. If you have spent the last few months or years feeling tired in a way that sleep does not fix, stay here. Because what you are about to hear will not just explain the exhaustion. It will explain why your mind is quietly forcing you into silence, and why that silence is not the problem. It is the beginning of something Jung called individuation. Here is the reframe. Laziness is a moral judgment. It says something is wrong with your character. Exhaustion, the real kind, is a signal. It comes from the unconscious, and it is not commenting on your character at all. It is reporting on your conditions. Jung spent his life studying the parts of the mind that operate below conscious awareness, and one of his central findings was simple, even if it is uncomfortable to hear. The unconscious does not negotiate. When a way of living becomes unsustainable, the unconscious does not send a polite memo. It sends fatigue, apathy, a heaviness that no vacation seems to touch. And here is the connection almost nobody makes. That fatigue is not random. It is the first stage of a retreat. Your psyche is quietly pulling you out of the performance, out of the noise, out of the group, and into something quieter. Something Jung would recognize immediately. The early, disorienting edge of individuation. By the end of this video you will understand why your exhaustion is not a flaw to fix, but a doorway. One that leads to silence, then to solitude, and eventually to a self that no longer needs the group's approval to function. Let's start with the mask you have been wearing without realizing it. Jung called it the persona. It is not a lie exactly. It is the face you present to the world, built from what your family expected, what your job requires, what your friends have come to rely on. A persona is necessary. You cannot function in society without one. But a persona was designed to be worn, not to become you. And this is where the exhaustion begins. Think about the amount of energy it takes to be on all day, to answer the way people expect, to hold your face in the shape that keeps the peace, to perform competence, cheerfulness, patience even when none of those are what you actually feel. Picture the version of you that walks into a family dinner or a work meeting already tired and still finds the strength to smile on cue, to laugh at the right moment, to ask the questions that keep everyone else comfortable. Nobody in that room sees the effort. They only see the result, the smooth, agreeable surface, and they assume it costs you nothing because that is what a well-worn persona is designed to look like. That performance has a cost, and the cost is paid in psychic energy, the same limited resource your mind uses for everything else, thinking, feeling, creating, resting. When the persona is running constantly with no place to take it off, the cost compounds. You start the day already in debt. And here is the part that connects directly to your exhaustion. At some point, the unconscious stops paying that debt quietly. It starts to protest. It slows you down, it dulls your motivation, it makes even simple tasks feel unbearable. Not because the tasks are hard, but because another part of you is demanding to stop performing. This is not weakness. This is your psyche pulling the plug on a performance it can no longer afford. And the first symptom of that pulled plug is almost always the same. You stop wanting to talk. You stop wanting to be around people. You start craving silence the way your body craves water after a fever. That craving is not depression, though it can be mistaken for it. It is the beginning of withdrawal in the Jungian sense. Your psyche removing you from the audience so it can finally stop performing for one. If any part of this is landing, stay with me for one more moment before we go further, because the next block explains something even deeper. Why the parts of yourself you have been suppressing are quietly draining you dry. Before we continue, here is something worth sitting with. Jung believed that real change rarely comes from adding a new habit or a new mindset on top of an already exhausted structure. It comes from subtraction. From removing the performance you no longer have the energy to sustain. Maybe it's the sentence about the mask costing more than it gives back. Maybe it's the one about a version of you the world doesn't consent to fund anymore. If one sentence in this video has already described your life, write it down somewhere in your own words. Not to share it, just to admit it to yourself. That admission is the actual beginning of the work Jung called individuation, and it starts long before anything visible changes on the outside. You don't need a plan yet. You don't need to quit anything, end anything, or announce anything. You just need to stop lying to yourself about what the tiredness actually means. Now back to why you are so tired. There is a second reason your exhaustion is not laziness, and it goes even deeper than the mask you wear. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is everything about yourself that you learned early and painfully was not acceptable. Anger that wasn't allowed in your house. Ambition that made someone uncomfortable. Needs that got you labeled difficult or too much or selfish. None of that material disappears. It goes underground into the unconscious, and it stays there, alive, waiting. And here is what almost nobody tells you. Keeping the shadow buried is not passive. It is an active, ongoing effort. Your mind spends energy every single day making sure those rejected parts of you do not surface, do not slip out in your tone of voice, do not show up in a moment of honesty you did not plan. That suppression runs in the background like a program you cannot close, and it burns fuel constantly whether you are aware of it or not. Multiply that by years, and you get a person who is tired for reasons they cannot point to. Not because their life is objectively difficult. Because an enormous amount of their psychic energy is locked in a vault, guarding material they were taught to be ashamed of. Maybe it was anger at a parent who never left room for you to disagree. Maybe it was ambition in a household where wanting more than everyone else made you the outsider. Maybe it was simply the need to be seen, in a family that only had attention for whoever was in crisis. Whatever it was, you learned early that showing it cost you love or safety or belonging. So you buried it, and you got good at burying it, so good that most days you don't even notice you're doing it. But burying is not the same as disappearing. Jung's approach to the shadow was not to destroy it or shame it further. It was to integrate it, to consciously acknowledge what is there, without immediately acting it out. Integration does not mean acting on every buried impulse. It means admitting honestly to yourself that the anger exists, that the ambition exists, that the need exists, instead of spending energy pretending they don't. That single shift from repression to acknowledgement is one of the most energy-releasing moves a person can make. Think of it like holding a door shut against something on the other side for years. Your arm gets tired, your shoulder aches, and you barely notice anymore because the strain has become the background of your life. The moment you finally let the door open, even a little, even just enough to see what's actually there, the arm can finally rest. That relief is not imaginary. It is measurable in how much lighter a person feels after finally admitting the thing they spent a decade pretending not to feel. But it requires something most people avoid instinctively. It requires quiet. You cannot meet your shadow in a room full of noise, obligations, and other people's expectations. You meet it in silence, alone, when the performance finally stops. Which is exactly why your exhaustion keeps pulling you toward isolation. It is not malfunction. It is your unconscious trying to get you into the one condition where the vault can finally be opened safely, on your own terms. Now let's talk about a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with emotional suppression, and everything to do with how your mind is built to think. Jung proposed that every person has a dominant psychological function, the mental process that comes most naturally, thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition. And alongside it, an inferior function, the one that is least developed, the one that costs the most effort to use. Most people are never taught this. So they spend years, sometimes decades, forcing themselves to operate primarily through their weakest function, because that is what school rewarded, or what their job demands, or what their family valued. A natural intuitive type, forced into rigid, detail-obsessed analysis all day, checking the same fields on the same forms, while the part of their mind built for pattern and possibility sits starved and unused. A natural feeling type, forced to suppress empathy and operate as if only logic exists, sitting through meetings where human consequences are treated as irrelevant, swallowing a reaction that has nowhere to go. A natural sensation type, built for the concrete and the present, forced instead into abstract theorizing all day, with no tangible result to point to at the end of it. Every hour spent working against your own dominant wiring is an hour of friction, and friction generates heat in machines and in minds. That heat over time is fatigue, not laziness. Misalignment. You were not built to run primarily on your inferior function, and when you do it constantly without relief, your entire system runs hot, inefficient, and drained, even on days when you technically did nothing hard. Jung noticed this pattern across the people he worked with, decades before modern language for burnout existed. He saw professionals who had built entire careers on their inferior function, succeeding by sheer discipline, and paying for it with a fatigue no amount of rest seemed to resolve. His observation was not that they should quit or abandon their work. It was that they needed to consciously make room for their dominant function somewhere in their life, even in small doses, or the imbalance would keep draining them regardless of how much they achieved. This is one of the most under-discussed reasons for chronic tiredness, because it looks, from the outside, like someone who should have plenty of energy. The job isn't physically demanding. The schedule isn't extreme. And yet the exhaustion is real because it is not coming from the body. It is coming from a mind forced to operate against its own natural current, day after day, with no acknowledgement that the current even exists. Which brings us to the deepest layer of all of this, the one Jung considered the true root of psychological suffering. Jung called it living out of alignment with the self. Not the ego and not the personality you show at work, but the self, the deeper, organizing center of the whole psyche, conscious and unconscious combined. When your daily life is built entirely around what the ego wants, approval, status, comfort, safety, while ignoring what the self is quietly pointing toward, the distance between the two does not stay silent forever. It shows up as a persistent, low-grade sense that something is missing, even when everything on paper looks fine. And exhaustion is very often the first place that distance becomes physical. You can be objectively successful by every external measure, and still wake up feeling like a stranger is living your schedule. The house is right, the title is right, the relationship looks right on paper, and none of it explains why getting out of bed feels like lifting something heavier than it should. That is the self, not the world, sending the signal. Think about it this way. Maybe you took the job that looked responsible on paper, instead of the one that actually pulled at something in you. Maybe you built a life around being the dependable one, the reasonable one, the one who never asks for too much, because that role was safer than finding out what you actually wanted. None of that was dishonest. It was survival at the time. But your ego can keep a schedule. It can force a smile, force a deadline, force a performance. But the self does not negotiate with willpower. When you spend years pursuing what you were told to want instead of what genuinely calls to you, the self does not argue. It simply stops lending you energy for the project. That withdrawal of energy is often the exact moment people start describing themselves as burned out, unmotivated, or lazy. They are not lazy. They are running a life that their deepest structure no longer consents to. And here is the part that matters most. That withdrawal is not punishment. It is information. It is the self, quietly refusing to keep funding a version of you that it knows is incomplete. Forcing a slowdown, forcing a silence, forcing exactly the kind of retreat that individuation requires before anything real can be rebuilt. Jung described the self as an organizing center, working in the background of a person's whole life, even when the ego has no idea it's there. It doesn't announce itself with a dramatic revelation. It shows up in the small refusals. The sudden inability to keep pretending a relationship is fine. The dread that appears every Sunday night before a job that used to feel manageable. The exhaustion that arrives, uninvited, the moment you finally have a quiet weekend to actually feel something you've been outrunning for months. Each of those is the self, quietly withdrawing its consent, one piece at a time. Now, if everything so far makes sense to you, here is the uncomfortable question. Why does almost no one around you talk about exhaustion this way? Jung drew a sharp line between intelligence and consciousness, and it explains almost everything about why this stays invisible. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to perform, to keep the machine running efficiently. Consciousness is the willingness to look inside the machine and ask whether it should be running this way at all. You can be brilliant, successful, admired, and still almost completely unconscious of why you feel the way you feel. Most people are. Not because they are unintelligent, but because looking inward is uncomfortable, and the world rewards output, not introspection. This is where mass mentality comes in. Jung warned, again and again, about what happens to individual awareness inside a crowd. In a group, people default to the lowest common psychological denominator. Simple explanations, easy judgments, shared assumptions nobody has to examine. This is not because people in groups are foolish. It is a psychological mechanism, one Jung documented across cultures, across history, The individual mind, when absorbed into the collective, tends to surrender some of its capacity for independent judgment in exchange for belonging. You can watch it happen in a single conversation. Someone offers a lazy explanation for a complicated problem, a few people nod, and within minutes the room has settled on the easy answer, simply because agreeing feels safer than being the one who complicates things. "You're just lazy" is a mass explanation. It requires no depth, no curiosity, no uncomfortable inward look. It is fast, social, and safe because everyone already agrees with it. The deeper explanation, the unconscious withdrawing its support from an unsustainable life, is slower, stranger, and far less convenient. Jung's own break from the psychoanalytic establishment of his time cost him friendships, professional standing, and years of isolation, precisely because he refused to accept the convenient, shared explanation the group had already settled on. He chose the slower, stranger truth instead, and it nearly cost him everything before it gave him anything. So the crowd defaults to the easy verdict, and most people, tired and unsure, simply accept it about themselves because disagreeing with the crowd, even silently, takes energy they do not have left. This is why the people around you will rarely offer you the explanation you actually need. Not because they don't care. Because consciousness, real consciousness, is rare, and most of the world is operating on borrowed conclusions instead of examined ones. Even people who love you can only offer you the depth of understanding they've reached with themselves. If they've never questioned their own exhaustion, they won't know how to help you question yours. That isn't a betrayal. It's simply a limit, and recognizing it will save you from waiting for an understanding that was never going to come from outside. Which leads to something even harder to sit with. If exhaustion is really your psyche pulling you toward truth, why does almost everything in you resist that truth so hard? Jung's answer was direct. The psyche protects the ego's sense of identity above almost everything else, and truth, real truth, often threatens that identity directly. If the truth is that your exhaustion comes from years of performing a self you were never actually meant to be, accepting that means admitting the structure of your life needs to change. That is not a small admission. It can mean relationships built on the old version of you. A career built on the old version of you. An entire self-image built on the old version of you. The ego will fight to protect all of that, even at the cost of your energy, your health, your peace, because collapse of a false identity feels, to the unconscious, like a kind of death. This is why so many people would rather stay exhausted than change. Exhaustion, painful as it is familiar. It doesn't require anyone to rebuild a career, a marriage, a friendship, a self-image from the ground up. So the ego makes a quiet trade, more fatigue, in exchange for keeping the identity intact, and most people take that trade without ever realizing they had a choice. This is also where shadow projection becomes relevant, and it explains something you have probably already experienced. When someone near you begins to withdraw, begins to say no, begins to need less validation from the group, it often makes the people around them deeply uncomfortable. Jung observed that we tend to project our own disowned material onto others, especially onto people who are doing the thing we secretly wish we had permission to do. Someone quietly choosing silence over performance can trigger resentment in people still trapped in the performance themselves. They may call that person cold, withdrawn, selfish. Not because it's objectively true, but because that person is holding up a mirror to a choice the group has not made for itself. Jung called this dynamic the projection of the shadow, and it explains why the reaction to someone's quiet growth is so often sharper than the situation seems to warrant. The discomfort was never really about you. It was about what your choice made visible in them. Maybe it was a friend who suddenly had opinions about how often you reply to messages. Maybe it was a family member who started calling you distant, the same month you finally stopped absorbing everyone else's crisis as your own. If you have ever pulled back from people, and been met with judgment instead of understanding, this is very likely why. You weren't rejecting them. You were doing the one thing that exposes how much everyone else is still performing. This is the part of the process most people are not prepared for, and it is exactly where Jung's concept of individuation becomes unavoidable. Individuation is the lifelong process of becoming a fully integrated self, conscious of your shadow, aligned with yourself, no longer running entirely on the persona built for other people's approval. And Jung was honest about something most self-help content leaves out. Individuation is often lonely. As you stop performing, some relationships built entirely on the old performance will not survive the shift. Not because you become cruel, but because the connection was never built on the real you to begin with. This is the price almost nobody warns you about. And it is worth naming plainly, because Jung himself did not pretend the path was gentle. Individuation, in his own writing, is described as a demanding, often solitary confrontation with parts of yourself the collective never approved of. It is not a weekend retreat. It is closer to a slow, deliberate dismantling of every borrowed piece of your identity, one at a time, until what's left is actually yours. The version of you that emerges through this quiet withdrawal will be harder to manipulate, harder to guilt into old patterns, harder to pull back into the performance once the psyche has tasted the relief of not performing at all. And people who benefited from your old, exhausted, endlessly available self will feel that shift, even if they can't name it. Some will adjust. Some will not. You may lose the friend who only knew how to relate to your exhausted, always available self. You may find a parent confused, even hurt, by a version of you that no longer explains every decision before making it. This is not a reason to stay small enough to keep everyone comfortable. It is the actual toll of becoming conscious, and Jung considered it worth paying. Because on the other side of that loneliness is something the performance could never give you. A mind that is no longer easily steered by outside opinion, because it finally has an internal compass instead of a borrowed one. There is one more thing worth saying clearly, because this kind of awakening can go wrong if it's misunderstood. Becoming conscious of your exhaustion, your shadow, your need for withdrawal, is not a license to look down on everyone still caught in the performance. Jung was explicit that individuation is not a hierarchy. It is not proof that you are better, deeper, more evolved than the people still exhausted, still performing, still calling their own withdrawal laziness. The moment self-knowledge turns into contempt for others, it stops being individuation and becomes a new mask, a subtler, more dangerous persona, built on quiet superiority instead of loud performance. Real lucidity looks different. It is quiet. It does not need an audience to confirm it. It can sit with someone still asleep to all of this without needing to wake them up, without needing to prove anything at all. That is the actual sign that the work is taking hold. Not how far you have pulled away from other people, but how little you need them to understand you in order to feel like yourself. So here is where this leaves you. Your exhaustion was never a character flaw. It was a message sent from the deepest part of your mind, telling you that the performance had become unsustainable. The mask was costing more than you were earning back. The shadow was costing more than you knew you carried. The mind was fighting its own natural wiring, and the self was quietly withdrawing its support from a life it never fully agreed to. You have two ways forward from here. You can keep calling this laziness, keep pushing through, keep performing until the exhaustion gets loud enough to force the silence anyway. Or you can listen to it now while it is still speaking softly, and let the silence do what it was always trying to do. Not punish you, rebuild you. You don't have to have this figured out tonight. You don't have to explain it to anyone, defend it to anyone, or perform your way out of it either. You just have to stop calling it laziness, because it never was. If any part of this described your last few months, don't scroll past it. Sit with it tonight in the quiet you've been avoiding. Because the exhaustion isn't asking you to try harder. It's asking you to stop long enough to finally hear what it's been trying to say.